How's it going, Mark? My name is Frances Black, and I'm a singer, and I also I'm CEO of an organisation called the Rise Foundation, and I also work as a senator in Leinster House as well. So delighted to be talking to you today.
I'm delighted to have you on, and that's an impressive list of things. But let's before we get to all that, let's go right back to you. It's funny, I was chatting to Aoife on this, and I kind of nearly laughed when I kind of asked this question. But like you growing up, like was music in your house?
It was. Often it kind of can look like we were kind of a very happy, clappy family all sitting around the fire singing. Like there were times where we had a sing song, definitely. I mean, no doubt about it. And I think my father was an island man. He came from Rathlin Island, up in North Antrim. And my mother was very passionate about singing. I mean, before she met my father, she used to go to the dances, and the band, when they would be looking for a break, they'd ask my mother to get up and sing a few songs while they'd be going having a cup of tea. So she loved performing and she loved singing. But my father, I suppose, coming from Rathlin Island, he brought down the tradition of the sing song. So he'd go up to the pub of a Sunday, and they, as you know, the pubs closed early of a Sunday. So he'd bring down a couple of large bottles of Guinness, and he'd get a few of the neighbours in, and everybody would have to sing a song, or if you couldn't sing a song, you'd have to say a poem or tell a joke, So I suppose that's where we saw the tradition. I mean, he just brought that was what they did on Rathlin. They'd no electricity, they'd no nothing. So they had to kind of play cards, entertain themselves, sing songs, music. And he brought that tradition down. And that's how that's how we had the sing songs. And then the eldest brother, Shay, was very passionate. When he was 13, he saved, we were from Charlemagne Street, which was a very, poor area. It was the tenements, and he saved like mad to get by himself a guitar. And he was a very passionate song collector as well. So in a way, and we all adored him, he was the cool big brother. So I think in a way he probably passed on, just by example. We wanted all to hang out with him. So music was the one way to hang out with him,
And then, I mean, as you're going through school and kind of, was it something you did in school, or was it just in the home? Like, were you kind of an arty, like were you singing in primary school or secondary school, or was it?
I mean, I did get into the choir, which was a surprise. But in fairness, Mark, I don't think anybody really. I was the youngest of the five of us. The rest of them were all musical. I probably was the least musical, to be honest with you. And I don't think anybody ever thought I was a good singer, or even there was a bit of shock when I got into the choir. Do you know that way? They were all kind of, when you get into the choir, wow, because I was a very quiet child. I was very crippled with shyness. So music probably, or singing wasn't on my radar. And I wasn't really encouraged, I suppose, because there was so much talent in our family. Do you know what I mean? Like Shay was a great singer. Michael was like unbelievable. He played the banjo. Mary was like, from the time she was like 3, she was just an incredible strength in her voice and power, and then my brother Martin was a fiddle player. So for me, it was just, I really genuinely didn't think that, and I, as I said, I was a very shy, kind of quiet kid. I made up for it in my teenagers, but yeah. So I mean, no, nobody expected me to be kind of, and even getting into the choir was a bit of a surprise for us all, to be honest with you.
And then that journey from then, as that kind of shy young girl to kind of when the Black family started. I mean, was that kind of a natural progression for you then, or was that something that kind of happened for you around your teenage?
No, I had to fight for that, Mark. And I'll tell you why. Again, it wasn't. Shay again was the eldest brother. He was 10 years older than me, and I just thought he was cool. He was a hippie, I thought he was the coolest thing since fried bread. And I suppose in a way for me, he was a father figure. So the 3 boys, which was Martin, Michael and Shay and Mary, had already gone off to the States, and they had done, some kind of work over there. They were busking and they were doing a bit of music over there. And when they came back, they were talking about doing a tour, like of folk clubs around Ireland. And there was no mention of me going ever until I had Shay wrapped around my little finger, and I pleaded with him to go. And I said, look, I won't. Look, all I'll do is sing the choruses with you on stage. I won't even sing a song. It's not that. I just wanted to hang out with them, So he said, okay, I don't know how the others felt about it, but he said, okay, come on, you can come along. So I went along on the folk clubs, small folk club tour just around Ireland. And I would sing maybe one song and then they all sang the choruses with me. And that was easy. Once I knew that they were going to be singing with me, it was easy. So I think that's how I got the bug, in a way, you know, I got the bug then. I didn't think I would. It wasn't the intention to be a singer or anything, you know, I just loved singing then.
And was there something else that wasn't intention to be? Like, was there kind of something in your head that you
Yeah,
wanted?
I always wanted to look after kids. For me, I felt I connected great with kids. I would have loved to have been a Montessori teacher or, you know, so I think that was where, that was what my focus was on. I wanted to work with children. So I was never really ambitious, to be honest with you. Do you know, I was never an ambitious person. Nah, little did I think. I mean, where, you know, and the things I've done in my life have been beyond my wildest dreams. Not in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be doing what I'm doing today. Do you know? So it's been an incredible journey.
And did you find then when you was it that kind of bug biting, like when you kind of went on that tour, was it like, oh, this is was there a sense of feeling at home on the stage? Was there a sense of feeling at home in that kind of?
Definitely felt comfortable. I had tried to kind of perform previously with a couple of lads, musicians, who asked me to be a singer, and I just froze on stage. Actually, the first time I got up with them, I couldn't sing. I was about 16 at the time, and I got up. It was in Slattery's, Capel Street. Got up on stage, and I had practiced with them so many times in the living room, and then I got up on stage, and I just froze. I just got, you know, I just I had to get off the stage. It was really embarrassing. So you know, it was easy for me to get up with my three older brothers and my sister behind me, you know, and initially I was singing on choruses with them, you know, that helped a lot. And then, when I sang a song, it was a very small folk club, and I sang a song called The Ploughboy Lads, that was on the first Black Family album, and they all sang the choruses with me. And I remember clearly performing in Taylor's Hall with them, and remember thinking, when people started to clap after I sang, I thought, wow, this is nice. This is a nice validation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't really have a sense of self before then until I sang. And then all of a sudden people were clapping after I sang, and it was like a bit of a shock, but it was nice. It was a nice shock, you know?
Also, I mean, like, you know, the Black Family, there was renown building up very, very quickly there as well. I mean, there's a very, very interesting time in the Irish folk scene as well, because there's a new layer after the Planksties are kind of, you know, there's a new layer of Irish folk singers and female folk singers kind of emerging as well.
Yeah.
And was there a sense that around that time, Francis, around, you know, that there was kind of something else happening?
I mean, look, we were big fans, you know, of Planksty at the time, and we just, you know, I suppose everybody. What was the name? Scarabray was the album that was released by. That wasn't Planksty. That was I can't remember. God forgive me for not remembering. But and we were just big fans of the music. And Shay, in a way, was the one who would have brought home all the albums, and we would have listened to them. So, like, yeah, I mean. But again, for me, I mean, there's no doubt about it. You know, I mean, I remember when Mary was, she was doing a lot of performing and she was doing a lot of singing, and we were so proud of her. And I used to go to all her gigs, and it was just incredible. And I remember the first time she performed on the Christy Moore show on RTE. That was, she sang Anarchy Gordon. That was a big deal. So yeah, it was a very, very interesting. We had the Negonals, Trina and Mairead Negonal, big fans of theirs as well. It was an incredible time.
And then you joined, is it Arcady or Arcady? How is that?
Arcady, I always called them Arcady. Yeah.
That again, but again, there was a kind of you look at the names that were involved in that, incredible, like Sean Keane, like Sharon Shannon, and a rake of others. But around that time as well, that kind of seemed to really kick off for you onto a whole different path. I mean, was that? You know,
yeah, that was a very interesting time, because Johnny McDonough, the Black Family had done a gig in Galway, and Johnny McDonough, who had been the baritone player with Dannon, had left Dannon and was starting his own band, which was Arcady, and he contacted Mary and asked Mary to ask me would I be interested in joining the band. He had come to see us perform in Galway, and he contacted me, and initially I was probably in my mid-20s, and I had two very small kids at the time. I was kind of going through a bit of a rough time with broken marriage, and was a tough time. But so Johnny asked me, and I wasn't, didn't feel confident enough initially. I was thinking, oh, this is, you know, I won't have the three brothers and the sister behind me. So it was a bit nerve-wracking. But Mary was the one who said, "Sure, Frances, you've nothing to lose." She was always great, you know, at kind of advising me. And many's advice I've taken from Mary has brought me onto the path that I've definitely come on. So Mary said, "Look, sure, go for it and chance it, and it'll be a great experience and see how it goes." And it was life-changing. I mean, it was one of those, you know, because I got to meet amazing people. I mean, Patsy Broderick is still my best friend to this day. Sharon Shannon is still one of my best friends. You know, Johnny, I haven't seen in many years, but he's an incredible visionary, you know. And so it was, you know, we traveled all over the world, you know, and we did a lot of traveling in the US as well. So yeah, it was, I suppose it was a step for me that gave me a little bit more confidence, you know, in myself.
But also, you mentioned two kids as well, because you had a young family around that time, so that must have been hard, like that touring America, young kids is not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah. No, it was hard, but I had, you know, I mean, I suppose when that all started, when the music started, you know, when I was about 25, you know, I had separated, but by the time I was 28, when the band really got going, and we were up to that point, it was rehearsals, but I had a really amazing partner in my life who was so supportive, and he was just incredible, and he still is to this day. But my mother lived next door to me, and my sister Mary, and what, you know, she was like, her kids were near enough the same as mine, so we almost became alternate mammies, if you know what I mean. So I would take her kids when she was away, she would take my kids when I was away, and then my mother was there to support, and Brian was there. So they had a good, you know, they were very structured, and they had good discipline, and they, you know, it was a good good time.
And then when, you know, again, looking back kind of in preparation for kind of chatting to you, kind of gas, because there's sections of your career which kind of, those stepping stones, whether they're accidental or not, but like then they lead on to whole other things. I mean, like, you know, then you came back and Kieran Goss in yourself kind of, and then that led on to kind of involvement in you know, but around that, I mean, like yourself and Kieran really seemed to hit something special between the Perrys in your writing. You know, there was
Myself and Kieran, like, I've never felt such a musical connection with anybody apart from my family. That I have with Kieran. I just don't know what it is, you know. What happened was I had kind of left Arcadia because the tours were getting longer, and I was, you know, struggling with leaving the kids, and I didn't want to leave them, you know, for longer tours. Like, it was one tour couldn't maybe 2.5 weeks a year where I'd be away for the kids, and then the tours were going to become more frequent, so there would be maybe 2 or 3 tours, and I just couldn't do it. So I left Arcadia, and just at that time I started to work with Kieran, and that was pure magic musically for me. I mean, I really felt so grounded in that time, and Kieran's voice and my voice blended so well. His guitar playing, you know, his songwriting, but his, you know, his presence on stage as well. I learned so much from him with regards to how to interact with an audience. I learned that from Kieran. He's absolutely, to this day, he's one of the best people I've ever seen that interacts with an audience. And he's a great songwriter and singer. So, like, you know, that was, I loved that. I really loved that. And we were doing support to Mary up in Belfast when we were spotted by a record company up there. And that's when we brought out our Frances Black and Kieran Goss album. So, you know, that was incredible. And what happened then, bringing us on to the next stage, was there was a track taken off the Arcadia album, which was After the Ball. There was a track taken off the Frances Black and Kieran Goss album, which was Wall of Tears. And that was placed on an album called A Woman's Heart. And then
a little small album that no one has ever heard of since.
No one has ever heard. No. So we're like, oh my God, they're still talking about it to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, it's kind of, I mean, I remember it well. And it's kind of hard to think now, but there's a whole new wave of, actually, and even from the late there a couple of weeks ago, the whole new wave of female artists kind of, you know, taking their claim in the Irish kind of culture. But back then, this was unheard of in a way. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of this whole...
Yeah.
And bringing you, I mean, that must have been dynamite to be part of.
honestly, it was amazing. I mean, and the women, like, as I say, you know, Sharon and Dolores and Mary Coughlin. Well, Mary wasn't on the first album. Mary Coughlin would be a very dear friend of mine now. Mary was on the second album. You know, and of course my sister Mary and Maura O'Connell and Eleanor. I mean, you know, it was just an unbelievable time. And I think it was an interesting time because it was just around the time that Mary Robinson had been elected as president, and that was like historic, you know, for a woman in Ireland to be president, and it was such an unusual thing all over the world, to be honest with you. And I think in Ireland as well, we were coming out of a recession, we were coming out of very dark times, we were coming out of the 80s, going into the 90s, you know, and I think this album just lifted the spirits of people. And yeah, I think, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but to this day, I think it's still the best-selling album that ever came out of Ireland, which is phenomenal, you know. And I'm so honoured to be part of it.
Yeah, and it bred so much. And I think you're interesting you mentioned the times because, you know, culturally, I just say there was a huge amount kind of going on. And even, you know, it was around the time of Italian 90, it was around the time of that kind of just...
Yeah.
But I think from also a kind of a flag in the ground moment for female artists in the folk scene, do you know what I mean? Which you were all there and had existed for many years, but just to actually have you all on the one track and all on the one stage was just kind of was a huge thing. And then for you, I mean, you know, you kind of then, there was amazing reviews coming for your tour. Things that really kind of stepped on. You know, there was big things starting to kind of happen in a solo album then, and then Talk to Me, which kind of just took off.
I still can't believe that was all like a dream, to be honest with you, Mark, that whole time, because, you know, even when I was offered the record deal initially, I nearly turned it down because I genuinely didn't think I would be capable of bringing a solo album out. You know what I mean? I was going, oh my God, like I wouldn't know where to start. And, you know, and at the time, James Blennerhassett was working with me, and he said, look, Frances, we'll work it out and I'll help him. We'll get Artie McGlynn to produce it. And so we went into the studio and we released Talk to Me, and I wasn't, do you know what was really interesting around that time, Mark? Again, it was Mary, because when I was offered the record deal, I was really thinking of not taking it because I just didn't feel capable, and I felt slightly inadequate, and I wasn't very confident. But Mary, again, another conversation, and she said, Frances, you know, why would you not take this opportunity? You know, like it's a fantastic opportunity. People would cut off their right hand to make an album, you know, for an album to be paid for. And she'll have it there and it'll always be there. And when I put the phone down, I thought, well, maybe it would be a nice thing to have for my grandchildren. You know, that go, you know, in time I'll come along and I'll say, do you know what? I made an album once and this is it, you know. So I wasn't expecting it to get to number one by any means, you know, and it was number one, I think, in Ireland for 10 weeks in the charts back in 94. And yeah, it was
unbelievable. The numbers, I mean, you look at it was number one for that amount of time, but also it sold 100,000 copies. Yeah. I mean, that was just, I mean, shocking. Like those numbers.
Ireland numbers, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but those numbers now don't exist anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's a whole different thing. And, you know, and then Christy Hennessy covered all the lies you talk. But that song, even looking back at that song, kind of was a song of that era. There was that really, you know, obviously Christy has a massive legacy in Irish kind of music, but it seemed to be something that you brought to that song that was very special. A meeting.
Yeah, and I never knew what that was. You know, I mean, I recorded that song for, you know, I actually nearly didn't record it. Because I couldn't relate to it myself at the time, you know, because my relationship was flying, I was in great form. And while we were in the studio recording, my best friend rang me, who had just split up with her fiance, and she'd found out that, you know, he'd gone off with somebody else and all sorts. And I just thought I'd record this song as my gift to her, you know, to give her strength to get through this really tough time. I mean, Christy had sent me the song, and it was there, and then I went called the lads back in, and I said, come on, let's try this song, but we do it different, because Christy kind of did a country and western version of it, or well, not country and western, but certainly a fast version, a faster version. And I said, let's slow it down. And then Artie came along with the rift, and, you know, and it was amazing. You know, I not in my wildest dreams did I think it would be as successful as it was. Yeah. It was unbelievable.
No, it really was. I mean, you were still touring heavily around at that time, were you? Was touring a big thing for you? Like touring, was touring a big thing for you kind of around that time?
Oh no, I was like, we'd only done the gigs with Kieran. I'd done some tours, small tours, folk club tours with Kieran, and then we had done some gigs with the Woman's Heart.
Yeah.
So I had to be honest, I didn't even have a band. You know what I mean? So like the musicians that came in, James had gotten them, you know, Graham Henderson and people like that, you know, had come in, and Artie obviously, and James was there, and we didn't even have, you know, so all of a sudden I'm getting these offers of big gigs and Olympia and all, and my nerves were gone. Like, it was so, because I would have leaned on Kieran a lot, and I would have leaned on Arcady, and I would have leaned on my family.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So now all of a sudden it's me on my own, and it was really scary, I have to tell you. But I got through it, you know. I got through it. I should have, when I think back on that time, I should have been really celebrating and reveling, you know, in the whole joy of the success, you know, because I was winning awards and stuff like that for the album. And all the time, there was always this little voice in my head going, oh, they're going to find out, you know, you're a bit of a fraud and you're not really that good. And, you know, all that stuff that goes on in your head. I didn't feel I was worthy of any of it, you know. So unfortunately, I didn't enjoy it, you know, and for years and years and years, I had those awards hid under the bed in a box. Do you know what I mean? It was only in the last few years that I took them out and go, that's nice to have, you know. It's like 20 odd years later, you know.
The gas though, you know, the irony then, you know, every album you released became more successful. Do you know what I mean? Like, kind of going, I'm not enjoying, like, you know, the Sky Road, and then you're winning Irma Awards. And so, I mean, I think it's kind of, I mean, it's something spoken about a lot in the arts, and particularly from performers, and a lot has come up on these interviews about people that, like, the public see one face, but yet the actual ability to enjoy yourself or to enjoy your success can be very, very, very difficult.
Yeah, and that saddens me today, that I didn't really enjoy that time, and I always had that negative, you know, I suppose, unworthiness, you know. So, do you know what I mean? I've always felt I wasn't worthy, and that saddens me, you know. But look, I came through it, and, you know, every album I brought out, I would be more nervous about, I would be anxious about, you know. Every gig I did, I was anxious about, you know. And I went through a period then where I lost my voice for a while, and that was a very difficult period. So, you know, in hindsight, I wish I believed in myself back then a bit more, and I wish I had a bit more confidence. But I suppose, you know, that brought me on another journey, you know, and all of that kind of negative thinking brought me to another place, which has brought me where I am today. So it was all meant to be, you know.
It's interesting when you kind of, as I kind of flipped into the kind of the new century, or, you know, it's 2000s, you know, even when you were releasing best of albums, they went huge. I mean, you know, the Essential Woman, platinum. Do you know what I mean? So you're kind of going, but I think your career kind of, you know, it was growing up the whole time, and even through periods which were more difficult for you, your career was still I just ask then, in relation to, because the whole other side, you know, and we'll talk about, you know, obviously recently in the Shannon, but then the whole, like, the Rise Foundation. I mean, you're talking about something there that everything you've spoken about, Francis, has been in a very empathetic way, you know, kind of writing, you know, releasing songs, that Christy Hennessy song that was given to you that you didn't empathize with yourself, but it's someone in your life or that you knew, you know, so that you seem to have been a very empathetic person by naturally. So, you know, to speak about the journey to the foundation, you know, because that's a big step.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that, you know, the Rise Foundation grew from, I suppose, my own journey in a way, but saying all of that, I mean, I'm in recovery. I've spoken very openly about my own recovery from addiction for many years. But after my mother passed away, which was in 2003, she left us all a small amount of money. And I, you know, I was, again, the music, I was struggling with the music. I mean, that self-belief piece. And, you know, it was kind of coming to a point where I was thinking, you know, I'm going to have to look at something else that makes me feel really fulfilled. So my mother left us all a small amount of money, and I left school when I was 16. Struggled big time in school. I often think, did I have some kind of undiagnosed issue, or, you know, that I you know, I always felt there was so, I could never I was never great at learning and reading and all that kind of stuff. So so when my mother passed away and left us this small amount of money, my daughter suggested that I go back to college, and she was in her 20s, I suppose, and she said, what would you like to do, ma'am? And I said, I'd love to. I really want to understand addiction more. I really want to get my head around what happens to people, that, you know, why people go into addiction. What is it that brings people into a place where, you know, they have become dependent on a substance or a behavior, and could go down that route of losing, you know, their dignity and their self-respect, and losing family members. And so I'd love to go back and understand that. So she said, why don't you go back to college? And she picked up the phone, she looked up something in the golden pages at the time, and there was an organisation, or a kind of a college called ATI, the Addiction Training Institute, who were over in All Hallows. And I rang them up, and they said, come in for an interview. I had to do the interview, and before I knew it, I was starting college. And, you know, I mean, I went, you know, and it was amazing. It was really hard though, because again, I'd left school when I was 16, and I found it really overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I got supports. I got supports from my family, and so I got through it all. And then, you know, you had to go train somewhere, and I ended up training as a therapist in the Rutland Treatment Centre. And I absolutely loved that. I really did. I loved working with those. I was still touring at the time. But, you know, they kept me on there as a locum therapist. And I loved working with those who were trying to get into recovery from addiction. And I loved the work. But it was really there that I started to work with family members who had somebody they love with an alcohol, drug or gambling problem. And I realised while working with family members that they were as lost, and they were as scared, they were lost in their, I suppose, fear of losing their loved one to addiction. Yeah. But they were also lost in it, if you know what I mean. They lost their own, sometimes they lost their own ability to focus. They'd wake up in the morning thinking about their loved one. Where are they today? What are they doing? When am I going to get the dreaded phone call? And end up in depression and huge anxieties and mental health issues themselves. Yeah. And almost addicted to the person in addiction, if you know what I mean. There was almost a parallel thing that I could see. So I continued to work in the Rutland, and at the time, Stephen Rowan, who was the clinical director at the time, had just retired. And I asked Stephen, would he help me to set up an organisation not unlike the Rutland, right, but just specifically for family members and their recovery. So I believe that addiction is a family disease or disorder, or whatever word you want to put on it. The whole family are impacted by it, and even family members who wouldn't be taking the substance or maybe the alcohol or whatever, they can be as impacted in a devastating way, and they need their own separate recovery from the person in addiction. Yeah. And I solely believe that. So that's what we did. I set up myself, Stephen still works alongside me. I set up an organisation called the Rise Foundation, and it's solely for family members. It's not for those who have a problem with addiction. It's only for the family members. And it's about their recovery. It's not about helping the family member to help their loved one. It's helping the family member to step into their own recovery from the impact of addiction.
And France, I mean, like, it's incredible on a number of the different levels. I mean, the work that the Rise Foundation do is brilliant and hugely needed. But for you personally, I mean, you mentioned there that you have spoken as you have done brilliantly and very openly in the past about your own journey. Like the decisions along the way to kind of do. I mean, obviously, this is, you know, it's recovery month at the moment, so an awful lot of conversations are going on about people's different roads to recovery and what that word means. But like for you, having gone through that journey, but then not alone the strength to go through it, but also the strength to be open about it, you know. And I mean, that must have been, was that a difficult thing for you to do, to kind of, you know, open up about it initially? When
it wasn't initially at all, but it did. it impacted me long term, because it almost felt that, you know, my identity became Frances Black, you know, the alcoholic, if you know what I mean. And I'm not saying I'm not an alcoholic, but I'm saying there's much more to me than just Frances Black, the alcoholic who's in recovery. Do you know what I mean? But I'm still glad I did it.
Yeah.
I don't regret doing it. I'm still glad I did it. That was the only, I suppose, negative impact it has on me.
Yeah.
And still has to this day. And it's like, you know, I came out talking about it 1994. I'm in recovery since 1988. And, you know, and I still, like, when I'm on the radio, if I'm doing newspaper articles, they want to know exactly the gory details. And the gory details of, sometimes I can't even remember how, you know, a guy stepped into recovery. Do you know what I mean? But like, so, you know, there's so much more to me now. But in saying all of that, I don't regret any of it. And I do know that by me speaking about it, there are a lot of people who followed suit and stepped into recovery because they were able to identify with my story. So for that reason alone, I'm really glad I spoke about it, you know.
I mean, that's something that has interested me a lot about, kind of, because we're, you know, I think it's a human thing, but I think in Ireland particularly, where it's very easy to kind of, you know, box people into their things, you know, which can be very, very difficult to get out of. But also, I mean, you know, it goes without saying, at the time that you did come out about it was a time when not an awful lot of people were. Do you know what I mean? I think it's kind of, it's more.
Yeah, it was at a time, there's still huge shame.
Yeah.
Huge shame around speaking around recovery. And there's huge shame around, you know, for family members to talk about their recovery even, you know, because then they have to say, well, I have someone in my family, you know, and it becomes something else. But there is huge shame in talking about recovery. It is getting better. There's no doubt about it. It's getting better, and people are much more, you know, accepting. But I think it is important to say that there should be no shame in speaking about it, you know.
But, I mean, for you as well, I mean, I think the work, say, you know, I'm what's really interesting on a societal level. I mean, we talk about your broader kind of, you know, political work in a minute, but the sense of the family, because I think, you know, an awful lot of, you know, trauma and addiction problems on a societal level are generational. You know, it's kind of, or societal. So, and, you know, the person was into recovery or not was into recovery, but you're right, the family and the friends, loved ones around them, without that support, like of organizations like your own, they are caught in that cycle, and even unbeknownst to themselves as well. So that must be really interesting when you make people aware of how much of a cycle they're kind of caught in as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really important that, you know, families are educated to understand that the impact that it can have on them. And often family members, you know, when they think that they're helping their loved one, they can end up enabling them. And when that happens, when the person in addiction continues to go down that route of self-destruct, the family member almost goes after them, if you know what I mean, into that self-destruct place. You know, because you get burned out, you know, you get burned out. You think you're helping, you think you're doing everything, but, you know, you're not getting the response. They're not stepping into recovery. And it can be actually soul destroying. The same way that the person in addiction, you know, it's soul destroying for them, you know. But what we do find in RISE, which I find is really interesting, is that when the family member steps into their own recovery, something shifts for the person in addiction. They see their family member maybe putting boundaries in place, stepping back a little, taking more care of themselves. And it's almost like initially they might, you know, react in a negative way and try and get them to come back into what we call the game playing of it all, or the dance of addiction. But often what happens if they keep those boundaries and not get pulled into the dance, their loved one will follow suit and step into recovery also. You know, it's very interesting, and it's wonderful. Honestly, it's wonderful to see family members getting recovery, you know, getting their own separate recovery from the person in addiction, and the impact of that will have maybe on their children or other family members when they, you know, like, for example, we had an older woman who came to us one time, and her daughter was in her 40s. This woman was in her 80s. And it was actually another daughter that came to RISE and said, I'm more worried about my mother I'm not worried about my sister who's in addiction because she's fine. But my mother is in such a dark place. She cannot function. She's so worried. And it was really interesting because we worked with the elderly mother, but we also had to work with the daughter who was worried about her mother, because she was so preoccupied with her mother that she couldn't be present to her own children. Do you know what I mean? She was losing sleep worrying about her mother, and she was constantly ringing her mother, how are you doing, what's happening? So her own children were losing out on, it's amazing the cycle.
But it's also, I mean, what you described there is in the way communities and the way families kind of work, and without realizing the impact, because I've spoken about this before with lots of people around the idea of kind of, trauma, and and then that word you use, shame, that people actually don't know what they're ashamed about, because they might be ashamed about something that never happened to them, but happened around them. It's kind of, and it's interesting because, the person who's going through the recovery themselves, or who has the substance problem, has one path. But in some ways, the person who hasn't got that substance to deal with is in ways not more difficult, but a different type of recovery, because they've nothing to latch it onto.
Well, there's no way of numbing out either. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
there's no way to numb out, and so they're constantly in this hypervigilant, anxious trauma place, and they're waiting all the time for that dreaded phone call, or what's going to happen now, what's going to kick off now, what am I going to hear now? And then if the person in addiction is having a good day, they're having a good day. But if the person in addiction is having a bad day, they're having a bad day. And that's where the codependency becomes unhealthy, and it becomes really toxic to them, because you can't depend. It's too much responsibility to give the person in addiction anyway. Do you know what I mean? And it's nearly unfair on the person in addiction, because they have enough to be dealing with. Do you know? So it's intriguing, and I find it. I love the work. I still do the therapeutic work. I wrote up all the programs. It's a 10-week family program. I'm going to have to update the lectures now in the next coming weeks, because we have more programs coming up.
Yeah.
I still do the one-to-ones. Well, I just love the work. I really feel, for me, that Rise and the work that I do at Rise is what I was meant to do.
Okay.
That's what I was meant to do.
And I mean, you were saying at the early beginning of Rise, you were still gigging and still performing and still kind of.
And I still gig it out.
Yeah, but did you? I mean, when you said there about, because again, not to say you're being successful in everything you do, but then Rise started winning awards. I know that's what it's about, but from a branding point of view, to acquire more funding, awards are great. So to get 2, Social Entrepreneur of the Year awards in a row, and I think, but also for you, I'd imagine, chatting to you, that it's the mother and the daughter you're talking about there, seeing their, recovery is probably worth more than any awards can give you. But to have that sort of notice on a public way as well can only be kind of a great fulfillment too, I suppose, for you.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, winning the Social Entrepreneurs was fantastic, because obviously there was funding to get us going for the first few years, and that was fantastic. But no, for me, for example, last week, a group of people came together and they want to do a charitable event, Rise, Swim for the Rise Foundation. And when I went to sit down and have a chat with them about the meeting, I met a young woman, and I'm not breaking any confidences, because she has spoken very openly about it herself, where she said, I went to Rise and it changed my life, and she only said that to me last week. And I could see the glow in her eyes. I could see the freedom in her eyes, if that makes sense. She was obsessed with her husband and his recovery, and she came to Rise thinking that I have to fix him, I have to make him better. And when she realized, well, this is actually for you, you could see that the tension gone out of her shoulders, the freedom in her eyes, and she was so grateful, so grateful. And she said, I'll tell the world I've nothing to be ashamed of, so that's what makes it all worthwhile. And I always said, when I started to set up Rise, or even when I went to speak about my own recovery, I always said, if it helps one person, and if it, to take a different direction in their lives, then it's worth it. Yeah. And I know that Rise has helped many people, many people, and has changed the lives, changed the course of lives for many families, which is phenomenal, you know, because one family member steps into recovery. So now that parent will be present to her children or his children. Do you know what I mean? So it's wonderful work.
And then, you know, not alone that's all great and grand and brilliant. And then politics. And then, I mean, like, was that something that kind of, I mean, obviously looking at your record since you've gone into political life and gone into the Shannon has been extraordinary. But like before, like when that was kind of bubbling around there, was there a resistance in you, or was it something you went, no, I wanted, like, was it one of those moments where you went, no, I
Listen, it was a moment of pure madness. Is the only way I can describe it to you, Mark. You know, it was like a couple of people had said it to me before Christmas. This was back in 2015. You know, Francis, you should run in the Shannon election. And I laughed, you know, and I said, haha, funny. And then January came, and I think it was what my husband said it to me. Brian said it to me. And he said, you know, Francis, maybe you should run in the Shannon election. And all of a sudden it was like, Jenny Mac, he believes that I could. If he believes it, maybe I could. So up to now, I love a challenge, Mark. You know what I mean? I've always thrown myself into the deep end, you know, and Rise is really, I suppose setting up Rise was probably one of the biggest challenges. But going back to college, getting up the first time on a stage, all those challenges, you know, or making an album, you know, things I didn't think I could do and I did do, and then they ended up great, you know. So like I thought, sure, look it, I'll run in the election and I learned from it. Wouldn't it be a great experience running in the election, seeing how it all works? And sure, I've nothing to lose other than I won't get elected, and sure, there's nothing wrong with that, you know. I've no fear of failure, I suppose, Mark. I've no fear of failure. I don't believe in failure. I believe you try something, and if it doesn't work out, then it's either not meant to be, or you'd go again, you try again. You know what I mean? So, or you just didn't do something right that time. You know, so I just thought, what have I to lose? And to my unbelievable shock and surprise and honour, I suppose would be the word, I got elected in 2016 into Shannon, and it is one of the biggest honours I've ever received from people of this country. And it's all councillors that vote for me. You know, nobody believed I could do it. Not even my own family, apart from my husband and my kids, but my own family were really worried, and they were saying, oh, Francis, you know, people have been telling me you're not going to, you know, they're having a hope in hell, and, you know, and I was going, but it doesn't matter, do you know? So, yeah, it's that, honestly, that was the biggest honour of my life.
Yeah, but also, I mean, you were the first independently elected woman in the Shannon, weren't you, at the time?
In the panel system, yeah, in the panel system, you know, like in the system that I was in, because obviously there was university, there's different panels, and there's university panel, but in the panel system, I was the first independent woman in the history of the state in the panel system to be elected into Shannon. Yeah. And that was like, you know, I still, nobody could believe it, honestly. Couldn't believe it myself.
And in the 4 years since, I mean, you know, because you've been very active, you've been very vocal. I mean, obviously, I mean, from the woman that you described, it kind of, you know, was behind the Black family at the very big, you know, or kind of started from there, and then kind of your own solo career, where it's kind of, oh Jesus, where the band gone, you know. And then, but there seems to be a big, when it wasn't, I suppose in the bizarre way, when it wasn't about yourself, when it was kind of speaking on behalf of society or speaking on behalf of people in their families, there seems to be a fire in you that kind of lit, or has lit, around. I'm not going to say around campaigns, but around people. And I think that's kind of
injustice. It's injustice, really, Mark. Yeah. Injustice does something. I really do not like to see injustice, and that definitely lights a fire in my belly. And you know, now you have to remember also that when you have a fire in your belly, it can burn out very quickly, and I'm very conscious of that. Yeah. But yeah, there's no doubt about it. You know, the 4 years from 2016 to this year was an absolutely incredible experience, and I really, honestly, I'll be really honest when I say I didn't really understand politics until I was thrown into the deep end. and how it all works. And I learned very quickly. And I did make, you know, I do feel I worked extremely hard, and I still could work very hard. Because the one thing I, you know, want to do is not let the people of Ireland down. If I'm in there, I want to make a difference. But in saying that, I do feel I definitely made a difference with, like, say, the public health alcohol bill. I'm still working on the issues around Palestine. Mental health is another area that I'm very, very focused on. So, like, I am working very, very hard. And direct provision was another one as well that I was very focused on. I'm working very hard. I don't like to see injustice. I work with a great group in Leinster House called the Civil Engagement Group. There's 4 of us, 4 women. Eileen Flynn being one of them. She just joined us. She's the first traveller ever to be nominated by An Taoiseach. A wonderful woman. Lynn Ruan, dynamic, powerful, and Alice Mary Higgins, also powerful women. So I'm so blessed to be working alongside these 3 women that I respect and admire and love at this point now, you know. And I feel so blessed to be working alongside them. And we work extremely hard. We work extremely hard in the areas that we're all very passionate about, passionate around social justice, and any injustice that happens. We're up there trying to be the voice for those who don't have a voice.
Well, you do. I mean, you do it, and those women you mentioned there particularly do. And I have a brilliant way of kind of segueing, you know, what happens obviously, you know, within the houses of the Oireachtas, but also, you know, keeping those values in the way that you kind of, whether it be on media or social media or in your own lives, that it's very much, it's one size fits all rather than be, you know what I mean? It's not like, so it's my public facing this, you live what you espouse to do. Francis, it must be incredible just to have George Mitchell, you know, that award presented. I mean, just talk about that. And was it 2018 the American Institute Award?
The Arab American Institute in Washington rang me up and asked me. It was a very interesting. A man called Jim Zogby came into Leinster House. He would have been very involved in the Democratic Party in Washington. He would have been advisor to Obama, and he was in visiting somebody in Leinster House, and somebody told him that I was there as a senator. Now, he had been a fan of my music, and he said, could I meet her? So he came into the office and we started to talk. Jim Zogby he's an incredible man, and has done phenomenal work as an advisor to many different people in the US. And he's also, I think himself and his brother set up a thing called Zogby Polls, and they do all the polls in the Middle East. But so we got talking, and Jim, I was telling him all about Rise and the work I'm doing, and he was blown away by it. And I mean, I don't know, had he some connection personally? I really don't know, but he really loved the work and he investigated it more. And when he went back and talked to the Arab American Institute, they decided that they would give the Rise Foundation an award for the work that we do in Ireland. And to have George Mitchell give me that award was like, again, it was like an outer body experience, Mark. That's what it was like. You know, a man that I would admire, and the phenomenal work he did on the peace process alongside John Hume and Jerry Adams and Albert Reynolds. You know, phenomenal work, and how he brought people together. And then for him to give me an award was really, really memorable. And then for the Rise Foundation. And since then, I've been doing great work with Jim around what's happening in Palestine as well, and around the legislation that I introduced back in 2018.
Maybe I won't keep much longer, but I'm just interested in that performative element. You now, I mean, what does getting up on stage mean to you now? Has it changed radically since you were?
Yeah, the funny thing is, Mark, you know, and I know, I find that if I do solo gigs, the anxiety still kicks in. So if I get up, somebody asks me to do a solo gig with me and my band, I get huge anxiety. But But when I perform, so for the last, say, 3 to 4 years, I've either been back performing with Kieran Goss, where myself and Kieran have done some tours together. But more recently, I've been on the road with Sharon Shannon and Mary Coughlin. And again, that has been pure heaven for me. And I love those women so much. They're just powerhouses. And we are great comrades now, I would say, the three of us. You know, we work really well together. So like, and the gig would be either myself or Mary would start off the gig, and then Sharon finishes off the gig, and then we all come on together, and God only knows what will happen at the end of the night. You know, we could end up doing anything, but it's really good fun. It's a great laugh. I love the performances, and I don't feel that anxiety again. So I suppose I haven't been doing, you know, I've been choosing not to do as many solo gigs because I kind of think, where is this anxiety coming from? And I just get too anxious. So I do more gigs with other people, and I love that. So I just do what I love now. You know, I choose to do what I love in my life. I choose the work in the Shannon. Again, I absolutely love every minute of it. I'll be heading in shortly. And the work with the Rise Foundation I love. And then the gigs with the girls. What more could a woman ask for in this age of my life? I'm very busy. I am very busy, and I have 2 grandchildren now. And my family are always and always have been a priority. And I don't have much time for my friends, as much time as I would like for my friends, because, you know, I do prioritize my family when I do have time off. So that's the only unfortunate thing in my life. But I have wonderful friends that understand, and we talk on the phone all the time, you know. So, but apart from that, life is good, and I've a good husband, and, you know, I'm not complaining. I probably work a little bit too much, but that's okay too. You know, life. I'll be retired long enough whenever I retire. I don't know when that.
Well, long may it be until that happens. And come here, look, thanks so much for taking part in this, Manson. It's been
very well.
Joy and an honour to speak to you, and congratulations on all you've achieved so far, and best of luck for the future, and hope to see you out in the real world when we're allowed kind of
absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks a million, Mark. All the best.